end of the presentation. If you experience any technical difficulties, you can let us know via the chat box as well. Let's get started. Nationwide violence is down overall, but we're still seeing epidemic levels in certain communities and with certain types of violence. Currently, at least 20 cities are experiencing spikes in homicides and shootings, including Baltimore, Chicago, and Milwaukee. People think of health. Classifying violence as a health issue is a new concept. When we consider the definition, we can begin to see the connection. According to the World Health Organization, health is defined as a complete state of physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or. So at a basic level, healthy is not possible. In order to explain the scientific evidence on preventing violence using epidemic control models, we must first explain why violence is itself an epidemic. There are only 3 characteristics of an epidemic disease: clustering, spread, and transmission. Violence exhibits all 3. When looking at violence, many U.S. cities look like the figure on the left. And seen in both vary year to year as well as season to season, depending on the child didn't left the room. Shortly started hitting the doll without any instruction. So the adult left the room. Moments later, the child began exhibiting the same behavior. This is a great example of modeling through exposure. Like the flu, cold, and tuberculosis, the greatest predictor of violence is previous exposure. To similarities in clustering and spread between violence and other epidemics, a closer look shows us that it's transmitted through the same process. Establishing an understanding of the science behind violence lays the foundation for treating it as a health issue. On this slide, you can see how behavior is picked up through social expectations and social pressure, and then maintained through changes to the brain resulting from chronic exposure. The first picture here on the left illustrates social learning, also known as modeling. It is shown that most human behavior is developed through social learning, with the majority being picked up through unconscious observation. In this picture, we see the young boy modeling the behavior of the adults in front of him. The brain is constantly observing, learning, and then mimicking new behaviors based on the people around us. As we develop these behaviors, they're reinforced by social expectations and social pressure. These perceived social expectations dictate our behavior by telling us what's expected and what's required for us to fit in. Violence is reinforced by those around us and then becomes the approved and recognized norm. In the second picture, we see a classic schoolyard fight where the behavior is expected and encouraged by those observing it. This social pressure is actually contributing to the continuation and normalization of the behavior. Beyond the social violence, direct experience as well. Witnessing violence is not limited to seeing an incident. It could also include being exposed to the trauma and aftermath. These neurological changes influence our behaviors. Experiencing a traumatic event can directly result in desensitization and hyperarousal. These changes, which cause heightened levels of fight, flight, freeze, or submit reactions, are a defense mechanism for perceived threats that can be life-threatening. At the individual level, this exposure and the resulting stress causes chemical changes in our brain that can have long-term impacts on our health and well-being. Similar to the flu and other illnesses, the likelihood of someone engaging in violent behavior depends on modulating factors. These factors that determine susceptibility to an illness or behavior can include age, prior immunity, type of exposure, dose, context, and more. Much like the flu, violence can be prevented. It's also important to note that not everyone exposed to violence ends up behaving violently, just how not everyone exposed to the flu will become ill. We model or imitate the behaviors we see. As this video shows, what we see and who we model ourselves after influence how we behave.
Looks like rain again today. Dark clouds gather and fill the sky. Don't know how to talk to you, just know how to say goodbye.
Have you actually got a driver's license? I don't think so.
Go back where you came from. Learn to speak English.
Go back where you came from.
The link between exposure to violence and across communities, but intergenerationally as well. In fact, 30% of children who are abused become abusers. Individuals that when war ends, violence stops. But because violence was present and people were exposed, it actually increases in combat nations post-war. This is another way to think about exposure to violence. As you can see, the more often a person is exposed, the more likely they will engage in violence. In this sense, the biggest predictor of violence is, again, a previous exposure to violence, just like the measles and the flu. When we're exposed to one form of violence, it increases our likelihood of engaging in other forms of violence as well, from child abuse to suicide. So let's put this into numbers. If I'm an average person in the US, my risk of being involved in violence is 52 out of 100,000. If I live in the city of Chicago, my risk increases to 62 out of 100,000. If I live in Englewood, a community in Chicago, my risk increases to 230 out of 100,000. If I live in Beat 735, a subset within the Englewood community, my risk is 300 out of 100,000. If my immediate social network is violent, my risk is 740 out of 100,000. And if I've been previously shot, my risk dramatically increases to 59,000 out of 100,000. So if I've been previously involved in violence in this neighborhood, my risk of being involved in violence, again, is almost 6. The outcome of social determinants. Clear that violence is conditions, in addition to ongoing exposure, results in more violence. Again, violence begetting violence. Violence also begets inequities. So when violence is present, we cannot have an equitable or healthy nation. Violence takes multiple forms and happens in multiple arenas. The images you see here are images people see on a day-to-day basis, but it doesn't have to be this way. As a society, one of our greatest injustices is how we treat violence. Our current understanding of violence has resulted in wrongful criminalization of people and communities, contributed to mass incarceration and harmful suppression tactics. What we need to do is move away from the notion of violence being an issue of bad people and bad places to recognizing what science clearly shows us and use health approaches to prevent violence. At Cure Violence, we use a three-pronged approach based on the World Health Organization's methodology. The first step is to stop the transmission of violence. We do this by first working to identify and treat those at highest risk for involvement. If exposure is stopped, then violence is not transmitted. To identify and detect, we use trained violence interrupters and outreach workers to prevent violence by identifying and mediating potentially lethal conflicts in the community and following up to ensure that the conflict does not reignite. When a shooting happens, trained workers immediately work in the community and at times at the hospital to cool down emotions and prevent retaliations, working with the victims, friends, and family of the victim and anyone else that is connected with the event. Workers identify ongoing conflicts by talking to key people in the community about ongoing disputes, recent arrests, recent prison releases, and other situations that could lead to violence, and they use mediation techniques to resolve these issues peacefully. Workers follow up on conflicts for as long as needed, sometimes for months, to ensure that the conflict does not become violent. Credible messengers are respected, influential, connected to the target area, and often individuals who have similar life experiences to the individuals that we're targeting. So these are the individual violence interrupters and outreach workers who perform this crucial work. Next, we prevent future transmission. We work to reduce risk for those at highest risk for involvement in violence. Trained, culturally appropriate outreach workers work with those at highest risk to make them less likely to be involved in violence by meeting them where they're at, talking to them about the costs of using violence, and helping them to obtain the social services they may need. Workers utilize their trust with highest risk individuals to establish contact, develop relationships, begin to work with people most likely to be involved in violence, and to engage them to convince them that the rejection of violence is something that could be beneficial in their lives. They do this often by discussing the costs and consequences of violence and teaching alternative responses to situations. Workers develop a caseload of participants who they work with intensively, seeing them several times a week and assisting them with their needs such as education and employment. But really, the bulk of the work is focused on behavior change. And finally, we work to change norms. So workers engage leaders in the community, as well as residents, local business owners, faith leaders, service providers, as well as those at highest risk, to convey the message that violence should not be viewed as normal, but as a behavior that can be changed. So whenever a shooting occurs, workers organize a response where often dozens of community members voice their objection to the shooting. Workers coordinate with block clubs and tenant councils, neighborhood associations, and community-based organizations to assist in hosting these types of events. Additionally, they use public education materials and distribute them around the community, as well as host community events to convey the message that violence is not acceptable. And you can see a bunch of the ones that folks have used in the communities that we've been working with for quite some time. So these messages are often targeted to those at highest risk. Sometimes they're a larger, broader message that the community is influenced by or is affected by, especially this "Don't Shoot, I Want to Grow Up." But obviously these are all coordinated at the community level with conversations with community residents and other partners to really think about what are the key messages that work in that specific area. So we work to shift away from these embargoed words in the left column to use the words that are in the right column. So as you can see, the words in the right column promote healing, prevention, and community. So these strategies, campaigns, and programs based on the tenets of the health approach move us away from traditional punitive approaches to addressing violence and towards providing care and healing and ultimately saving lives. This is a short trailer for a documentary that we put together that provides another glimpse into our work.
I'm from the hood where it's dark outside late nights. You can't walk outside without a gun. Oh my God.
We was reading the letter, and then a few minutes later, we heard the shots down the street. All I want is justice, and I'm trying not to have street justice.
First time I got shot at 18, then I got shot again at 21. I was just on a rage, a revenge.
My first case, I got guns, 100 bundles of dope, 70 bundles of rocks, and a stolen car. I was 13.
It's a violence prevention program. We're trying to prevent violence on the front end.
Whenever someone is shot, stabbed, or jumped on, either myself or someone from my team go talk to the victim and the family, right then and there in the crisis. Hold on, that's hospital calling right there.
I was shot and paralyzed at 18. I'll be 42 this year. I ain't just changed overnight.
All their life, they've been in the streets. They've been around high-risk situations. They incited them. I incited them.
It was a dead end, either jail or death. I choose neither one.
When I came home, I was looking to sell drugs. She was like, that ain't the way of life no more. When I'm like, I can't do it because of my criminal background, she like, I did it, like, why can't you do it?
This good right here came to me and taught me how to let go.
One of their guys actually came and took a gun out of my hand. I'd be back in jail if it wasn't for them.
We give them the platform to say, you could change your life.
When everybody turned their back on me.
I will turn my back on you. Sorry, man.
We get these young boys seeing differently and thinking differently, we win it. That's it.
Cure Violence works here on the island of Puerto Rico just as it does in Chicago, Philadelphia, and other parts of the world.
We damn good at what we do.
We know that using health approaches work. This is Dr. Daniel Webster of the Johns Hopkins University Bloomberg School of Public Health, who conducted the evaluation of Safe Streets, Baltimore's Cure Violence replication. And we have Charlie Beck, the Los Angeles police chief, on the right. So you can see statements that both of them have made in terms of using a health approach to resolve violence. In today's data-driven world, communities demand evidence-based programs that have been proven successful through rigorous, independent, and scientific evaluations. The Cure Violence Health model has been successfully replicated and proven effective through multiple independent evaluations. As you can see from this slide, in 3 unique cities, Chicago, Baltimore, and New York, each show large, statistically significant reductions in violence due to the model. Sites evaluated in Chicago experienced reductions in shootings and killings of between 41 and 73%. Sites in Baltimore saw a 56% reduction in killings, and the recent study that came out from John Jay College, sites in New York saw a 63% reduction in shootings. In addition to these reductions, evaluation results have shown changes in behavior and norms. In Baltimore, individuals in the target area were found to be 4 times more likely to show little or no support for gun use. In Chicago, program participants identified outreach workers as the second most important person in their lives, only second to parents. As you can see here, additional results showing changes in norms as well as effects on parenting and employment. So independent evaluations are continuously underway. If you're interested in the full evaluations and their executive summaries, you can find them on our website at www.cureviolence.org under the Results tab. At Cure Violence, we believe that a world without violence can be achieved by using disease control and behavior change methods. We're guided by the view that violence is a health issue. As we continue to replicate the model in cities across the country and actually the world, we're guided by the following 4 core principles. So 1, an understanding that violence is indeed a health issue. 2, that individuals and communities can change for the better. 3, community partners and strategic partnerships are keys to success. And 4, rigorous scientific and professional methods are essential to ensure effectiveness. At Cure Violence, we're driven by the data. So we work with communities to identify the qualitative and quantitative data that will ensure we're working with the right people in the right places at the right time. The model requires strategic implementation with partners committed to the process in order to meet the needs of those at highest risk and change behavior and community norms. We've learned a lot since 1999 and have embedded those lessons into the training and technical assistance delivered to cities worldwide. Most recently, we're working on adaptations to include other forms of violence and non-traditional settings. As you know, every city is unique. We meet you where you are and allow your asset and opportunities to drive the work. In terms of system development assistance, building out the larger system requires involvement of sectors, further showing that there's a role for all to play in the prevention of violence. This includes identifying roles and responsibilities for state, county, and city health departments, which are key to the development and implementation of integrated, comprehensive, community-based violence prevention. So some of the responsibilities for these departments may include implementing epidemic control programs to prevent the spread of violence, assessing and analyzing data on violence from hospitals, police, and other sources to provide improved health information, leading social marketing efforts to change norms about violence and promote health behaviors that prevent violence, and tracking and monitoring data to assess the impact of strategies and refine practices. Collectively, the Cure Violence Technical Assistant Team has over 80 years of experience working with communities to create sustainable, equitable change. Our experience ranges from frontline worker training to program implementation to program adoption and systems change. At the core of our training team is the fact that we are all practitioners at heart. When thinking about the critical elements of the model, we must be working in the right community with the right lead agency, implementing organization, partners, and approach. The right approach must include the right workers, using data in a way that informs the work, working with those at highest risk, and using messages that make sense across all communities, across all community partners. This part needs to be taken out. I'm going to pause. The model is not complete with just the 3 steps: interrupting, treating, and norm change. It also requires constant monitoring and technical assistance. When thinking about the critical elements of the model, we must be working in the right community with the right lead agency, implementing organization, partners, and approach. The right approach must include the right workers, the use of data, the right participants, and the right messages and messengers. Cure Violence assists in determining the target areas for implementation. We ask ourselves, where is the violence currently present? What's driving it? What are the historical trends? We look at the smallest unit of measurement, whether it be a community statistical area or police beat or post, and we compare that data over the last 3 to 5 years with the inclusion of community input. It's important that we identify an area where data can be looked at over time so that we're able to assess effectiveness. As a health initiative, we suggest that the health department, hospitals, health-based, community-based organizations, and/or universities focused on health are really leading the effort in terms of this work. The mission of the lead agency must be in line with Cure Violence. There must be strong relationships to the community and they must work with those at highest risk and be supportive of outside of the box type approaches. Really, there's a role for everyone to play in this work. There must be buy-in from all the partners that you see here on this slide. They must have respect for credible messengers who are really the only individuals that can truly reach those at highest risk. Service providers must support and provide quality, equitable, culturally responsive services for the population. This is a population that has historically been turned away and are often reluctant because of trauma imposed by systems. Having the right staff is probably the most crucial piece of having a successful event. Staff must be credible, respected, and connected to the target area. Development strategic plan based on the needs and characteristics of the community helps to ensure that the right team is built. Teams are selected based on the pattern of violence, the size of an area, the number of groups that are involved in that area, and a variety of additional factors. The minimum number of people per team tends to be 7. But for larger areas or communities inundated with violence, that number can double and even triple. The team covers a wide variety of roles, from strategic planning, street-level intervention, and longer-term non-traditional case management. In terms of who we work with, individuals that are recruited to become program participants, the teams are focused solely on those that are at highest risk for involvement in violence. Often that includes individuals that are thought to be a member of a gang or group known to be actively involved in violence. They're thought to play a key role in this group. They often have a prior criminal history, so this includes crimes against persons, pending or prior arrests for weapons offenses. They're often involved in street activity that's highly associated with violence. They've been the victim of a shooting within the last 90 days. They're between the ages of 14 and 25. They've been recently released from incarceration with a violent crime or crimes as the underlying offense, and often they're a weapons carrier. Continuous analysis of official data and site-level efforts are crucial to examining and ensuring effectiveness and efficiency. So kind of all of those pieces of making sure that you have, the right community, the right staff, the right partnering agencies, all of that is crucial implementation, but then the work that's being done has to be constantly evaluated, constantly assessed to make sure that we're working in the right places at the right times with the right people. And a lot of the time where folks miss a beat is using data strategically every single day. So to increase a site's ability to analyze their work, we developed a database that's web-based, password protected, and easy to use. So we collect data on all program efforts. So that includes outreach participants, community activities, shooting responses, community mobilization, public education distribution, all of the details around conflict mediations. And then all of the data in this system can be sorted and reported in a variety of ways to inform day-to-day program activities and the broader strategic planning. For communities interested in implementing the Cure Violence model, we coordinate an assessment visit to evaluate current efforts and available data to provide a recommendation for the best implementation strategy. So really looking at all of the data, talking with community and with partners and other CBOs, and really trying to get a sense of the level of violence and what's driving it within a specific community. Based on this assessment visit, we're then able to come up with recommendations for how we see this being implemented in that environment. So here's a draft agenda for a typical assessment visit. As you can see, we work with many partners and city and community leaders. So we collect data, we conduct information sessions, and we begin planning for implementation. Throughout implementation, Cure Violence provides continuous training and technical assistance to work coordinate partners and partners. Level Cure Violence. Overcome using standings and we're also working to change, treat, eradicate violence. Multiple settings and time, hospitals, rapid individualized assistance, crisis support, and cost of implementing is dependent upon multiple factors, including cost of living, average 1,000 to 750,000 program implementation. Data and faith leaders in violence. That funding is really challenging, but the return on investment again. So for every spent on Cure Violence insurance, $18 in savings. The first year of Chicago's West Garfield Park implementation saved $8.1 million. According to a recent report by the Giffords Law Center to Prevent Gun Violence, a $1 million investment that leads to the prevention of just 3 gun homicides pays for itself and then some. So just a couple places that we've been featured. Cure Violence was the focus of the award-winning documentary, The Interrupters, and has been featured in several other publications. The Economist stated that Cure Violence is the approach that will come to prominence. So I hope that you found this presentation helpful. Before I begin answering questions, I just wanted to let you all know that we're going to be sending a survey out to you following this session. We would really love your feedback. It helps us to work on these webinars and make sure that we're delivering information that is helpful. So on that note, I will get ready to take the questions you've submitted.
Hi, everyone. So looking at the questions that are in the chat box, if anyone has one and they haven't submitted it yet, feel free to, but I will answer Karen's question. So her question was, how would an individual go about building these community connections to buy into the Cure Violence project? I would say there's a couple different ways. So a lot of times in cities and in communities, there is violence prevention or intervention work that's currently going on. So there are city agencies and community-based organizations and faith groups that are already working on this issue in some way, shape, or form. So really about building that coalition. In addition, here we have a YouTube channel that has a bunch with some cities information. If a little of this buy-in, you know, we will do individual anything that we're more than willing to. So another question, you will all with your feedback, and in addition to that, to send in email questions, cureviolence.edu. We'll try and get back as soon. Question. Just a couple people difficulty they registered, so you'll have that. Hopefully the sound will work for you